My name is Maria Reyes, and I am 40 years old. For half of my life, I have been a nurse, a title I wear with more pride than any other. In the humming, sterile corridors of a hospital, surrounded by the quiet beeping of machines and the hushed, urgent whispers of life and death, I found my purpose. I built a career, a reputation, and a life for myself that was respected by my colleagues and cherished by my patients. But in the opulent, wood-paneled world of my father, Arthur Reyes, this life I had so carefully constructed was seen as nothing more than a colossal failure, a public monument to my defiance. He was a titan of corporate law, a man who believed power was the only currency that mattered, and in his eyes I had chosen to be a servant when I could have been a queen. I never imagined that the very servant's career he so profoundly despised would one day become the only key to his survival. I never dreamed that the world he built with power and influence would crumble, leaving him utterly dependent on the one person he had cast aside, forcing him to beg for the help of the daughter he had disowned. This is the story of how a single, desperate phone call managed to turn 20 years of bitter scorn completely on its head, and how I became the sole gatekeeper to my own father's life. Before I dive into the story of how my father's carefully curated world came crashing down around him, I want to connect with all of you listening. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always so incredible to see how far these stories travel and to know we're all in this together. If you've ever felt underestimated by the very people who were supposed to believe in you the most, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And if you're new here and want to be part of a community that understands these complex family struggles, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get into it. To understand the earth-shattering irony of my father's predicament, you first have to understand the world I came from, a world where love was conditional and respect was something to be won, never freely given. My childhood was a masterclass in contrast, lived in the long shadow cast by my father, Arthur Reyes. Our home was a testament to his success, a sprawling stone manor with manicured lawns that seemed to stretch for miles, rooms filled with heavy, dark furniture, and an oppressive silence that was only ever broken by the sound of his booming voice or the frantic ticking of an antique grandfather clock. He was not a man of warmth or easy affection. He was a force of nature, a legal predator who had built a dynasty from sheer will and intellectual brutality. His world was one of contracts, loopholes, and conquests, and he expected his children to be his heirs not just in name, but in spirit. My older brother, David, was the perfect successor. From a young age, David was a mirror image of our father. He had Arthur's sharp mind, his competitive fire, and his easy-to-wear arrogance. Every debate team trophy he won, every academic award he secured, was celebrated with a lavish dinner and a proud, rare smile from our father. David was the golden child, the son who was walking the preordained path to a partnership at Reyes and Sterling. I, on the other hand, was a puzzle my father could never solve, a deviation from his perfect plan. My mother, Eleanor, was a different kind of force, one of passive acquiescence. She was beautiful, elegant, and her entire existence seemed dedicated to orbiting our father, smoothing his path and absorbing his temperamental shockwaves. She loved me, I believe, in her own quiet, ineffectual way, but her loyalty was always unequivocally to him. She was the great enabler, the silent partner in the emotional architecture of our family. Her approval was a soft, fleeting whisper, while his was a roaring proclamation that echoed through the halls. When I was 8, I found a baby sparrow with a broken wing in our garden. While David was inside memorizing Latin phrases for a mock trial competition, I was fashioning a tiny splint from a popsicle stick and a thread from my sweater. I spent days feeding it crushed berries with an eyedropper, keeping it warm in a shoebox lined with cotton balls. When the bird finally healed and I let it go, watching it soar into the sky was the purest moment of joy I had ever felt. I ran inside, my heart bursting, to tell my father. He was in his study, a cavern of leather-bound books and cigar smoke. He glanced up from a thick legal brief, his eyes cold and dismissive. "A bird," he said, his voice dripping with disappointment. "Maria, your brother just won the regional debate championship. He's learning how to command a room, how to win. You are in the garden playing veterinarian with flying vermin. Focus on things that matter." He didn't even look at me as he spoke. I just stood there, the elation draining from me, replaced by a familiar chilling shame. My great triumph was, in his world, a trivial, worthless pastime. My mother, who had overheard from the doorway, simply gave me a sad little smile and ushered me out of the room, whispering, "Don't bother your father when he's working, dear." Her silence was its own kind of verdict. This pattern repeated itself endlessly through my teenage years. While David was clerking for a judge during his summer breaks, I found a volunteer position at a free clinic in the city. The work was grueling but exhilarating. I was just an assistant, doing the tasks no one else wanted, changing linens, stocking supplies, holding the hands of scared elderly patients, but I felt more alive there than I ever did in our sterile, silent home. I was part of something real, something that helped people who had nothing. I kept it a secret for months, knowing what the reaction would be. Of course, my father found out. A family friend had spotted me leaving the clinic and dutifully reported back. The confrontation was biblical. He waited for me in the grand foyer, his face a mask of thunderous rage. "A clinic," he bellowed, the sound bouncing off the marble floors. "You are a Reyes. We build institutions. We endow hospital wings. We do not wipe noses and clean bedpans for the indigent. This is a servant's work, Maria. It is beneath you. It is beneath this family." I tried to argue, to explain the fulfillment I felt, but it was like reasoning with a hurricane. "I like helping people," I said, my voice small but defiant. "Then write a check," he snarled. "That's how people of our stature help. You are forbidden from going back there. You will spend the rest of the summer studying for your law school entrance exams." He didn't just forbid me, he had his driver take me to and from a private tutor every day, ensuring I had no opportunity to disobey. My mother simply wrung her hands and said, "He just wants what's best for you, Maria. He has such high hopes." His hopes felt like a cage. To add another layer to the carefully constructed family hierarchy, there was the matter of David's life. Every milestone for him was a national holiday. When he was accepted into Harvard Law, my father threw a party that was featured in the city's society pages. When he bought his first car, a sleek black sports car gifted by our father, it was parked in the circular driveway for all to admire. When I, a year later, saved up enough money from a part-time waitressing job to buy a beat-up 10-year-old sedan, my father took one look at it and laughed. "Good God, Maria," he'd said, shaking his head. "It looks like something you'd win at a carnival. Park it in the back, behind the gardener's shed. I don't want the neighbors thinking we've fallen on hard times." It wasn't about the car. It was about the message. My achievements, born of my own labor, were an embarrassment. David's, bestowed upon him, were a source of immense pride. David, to his credit, was never malicious about it. He was just oblivious, floating through life on a cloud of privilege and paternal approval, genuinely unable to comprehend why I was so perpetually unhappy. "Just do what he says, Maria," he'd advise me, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "It's so much easier." The final, irreparable break came when it was time to choose a university. I had done what he wanted, in a way. I had the grades, the test scores. I was accepted into one of the country's top pre-law programs. My father was ecstatic. For a brief, shining moment, I felt the warmth of his approval. He spoke of my future as if it were a settled matter, a second great legal dynasty in the making. But I had also, secretly, applied to and been accepted by Johns Hopkins for their nursing program. For weeks, the two acceptance letters sat on my desk, one representing my father's dream, the other representing my own. I knew what I had to do. I found him in his study, the site of so many of my childhood humiliations. I took a deep breath and told him I was choosing nursing. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any of his rants. He slowly took off his reading glasses, placing them deliberately on his desk. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not just anger in his eyes, but a genuine, cold revulsion. A nurse, he said. The words spoken so softly they were like shards of ice. After everything I have given you, all the advantages, the education. You want to throw it all away to be a glorified handmaiden, to change bedpans and follow a doctor's orders for the rest of your life. It's a noble profession, Dad, I argued, my voice trembling. It's about compassion and skill. Compassion is a weakness, he roared, slamming his fist on the desk, the sound making me jump. Skill is arguing a case before the Supreme Court, not taking a blood pressure reading. I have spent my life building a name, a legacy. David understands that. He will carry that name forward with honor. You are a disgrace. You are deliberately choosing a life of servitude to humiliate me. His words were like stones, each one striking a blow. My mother rushed in, drawn by the shouting. Arthur, please, she pleaded. He ignored her, his eyes locked on me. If you walk out that door and go to that trade school, he said, his voice dropping back to that chillingly calm tone, you are no longer my daughter. This house will be closed to you. Your inheritance, your trust fund, everything, it will be gone. You will be on your own. Do you understand me? I looked from his unforgiving face to my mother's tear-streaked pleading one. She was begging me with her eyes to just give in, to make it easy, to choose the path of least resistance. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't. Staying would mean the death of my soul. I looked my father in the eye. I understand, I said, my voice finally steady. I turned and walked out of the study, out of the house, and out of the Reyes family. The great oak door shutting behind me sounded like the closing of a tomb. Life on my own was brutally hard at first. The trust fund my father had dangled like a weapon was gone. I worked 2 jobs to put myself through nursing school, serving tables at night and studying during every spare moment. I lived in a tiny, run-down apartment that was a world away from the mansion I grew up in. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. The air I breathed was my own. My successes and failures were my own. There was a fierce, liberating joy in that. I poured all the pain of my father's rejection into my studies and my work. I graduated at the top of my class, summa cum laude. I sent an invitation to my pinning ceremony, a sacred rite of passage for nurses, to my parents and brother. It was a small, hopeful gesture, a tiny olive branch extended across a chasm of silence. The day came and went. The chairs I had saved for them remained empty. I felt a familiar pang of hurt, but it was duller this time, less sharp. A week later, I was having coffee with a cousin who, unlike the rest of the family, had kept in quiet contact. She mentioned a lavish party my father had thrown. It was incredible, she said, oblivious to my pain, all for David's promotion to junior partner. Your father pulled out all the stops. I did the math. The party had been on the same day as my ceremony. It wasn't an oversight. It was a statement. A final, deliberate act of erasure. It was during those early, difficult years at the hospital that I met Margaret, the charge nurse on the surgical floor. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor, sharp, intelligent eyes, and hands that could calm the most terrified patient with a single touch. She saw something in me that my own family never had, a raw, untamed potential. She saw my hunger to learn, my quiet competence, and the fierce compassion I tried to hide behind a wall of professionalism. Margaret became my mentor, the maternal figure I had always craved. She was tough on me, pushing me harder than anyone else. Nursing isn't just about being nice, Maria, she'd say, her voice firm but kind. It's about being smart. It's about seeing what the doctors miss. It's about being the patient's last line of defense. She taught me how to read the subtle signs of a patient crashing, how to navigate hospital politics, how to advocate fiercely without being dismissed as emotional. She took my pain and helped me forge it into strength. Don't ever let anyone, she told me one day, her eyes boring into mine, make you feel small for choosing a life of service. There is more power in a healing hand than in any corporate boardroom. She was the one who encouraged me to go for my master's degree, to aim for a leadership position. She saw me not as a servant, but as a future leader. Her belief in me was a lifeline, a countervailing force against the weight of my father's lifelong disapproval. It was the foundation upon which I rebuilt my sense of self-worth, brick by painful brick. Years passed, I climbed the ladder, just as Margaret predicted. I became a charge nurse, then a nursing supervisor. I was respected, I was effective, and I loved my work. The sting of my family's rejection had faded into a dull, chronic ache. I had my chosen family at the hospital, a network of friends and colleagues who valued me for who I was. The world of Arthur Reyes, with its power plays and society pages, felt like a distant country I had once visited. It was in this period of my life, when I was secure in my own skin, that I met a young intern named Ben Chen. He was, without a doubt, one of the most brilliant minds I had ever encountered. He could diagnose rare conditions from a single obscure symptom and recite complex pharmacological interactions from memory. But he was also a bundle of nerves, socially awkward, and utterly terrified of failure. In the high-pressure, high-stakes environment of the intensive care unit, his brilliance was often eclipsed by his anxiety. He second-guessed himself constantly. His hands would shake when performing simple procedures, and he struggled to connect with patients, speaking to them in cold, clinical terms that only frightened them more. The senior attending physicians were losing patience with him. They saw his hesitation as incompetence, his anxiety as a liability. Dr. Albright, the head of the ICU, was a formidable figure, a man with a reputation for being as skilled with a scalpel as he was with a cutting remark. He had a particular disdain for interns he deemed not cut out for the pressure. He was watching Ben like a hawk, waiting for him to fail, and one night, Ben did. It was a chaotic evening in the ICU. A multi-car pileup had flooded the ER, and we were getting the most critical overflow. Ben was assigned to a patient with a severe infection, Mr. Harris, an elderly man who was already medically fragile. The man's blood pressure was dropping precipitously, and Dr. Albright had verbally ordered a powerful vasopressor. In the rush and the noise, with alarms blaring and staff running, Ben misheard the dosage. He drew up 10 times the appropriate amount. He was at the patient's bedside, needle in hand, about to push the medication into the IV line, a dose that would have sent Mr. Harris into immediate cardiac arrest. I happened to be walking by on my way to another room, and something in Ben's posture, the tremor in his hand, the unnaturally large volume in the syringe, made me stop dead. "Ben, hold!" I said, my voice sharp but low. He froze, his eyes wide with panic. I quickly took the syringe from his hand, glanced at the patient's chart, and saw the error. My blood ran cold. It was a mistake that would have ended a life and a career in a single instant. Dr. Albright stormed over, having seen the commotion. "What's the problem, Nurse Reyes?" he demanded. Before I could speak, Ben, white as a sheet, confessed. "I almost gave 10 times the ordered dose," he stammered, his voice cracking. Albright's face turned purple with rage. "You what?" he roared, his voice echoing through the unit. "You are a menace. You could have killed him. I want you out of my unit and out of this hospital. You're finished," he turned to me. "And you! You're his supervising nurse. This is on you, too." In that moment, I had a choice. I could have let Ben take the fall. It would have been easy. He had made the error, but I saw the utter, soul-crushing terror in his eyes, the look of a young man watching his entire future disintegrate. And I remembered Margaret and how she had stood up for me. I stepped between Dr. Albright and Ben. "With all due respect, Doctor," I said, my voice perfectly level, "the failure here is one of supervision, and that's mine. This unit has been understaffed and chaotic for hours. Dr. Chen has been on his feet for 26 hours straight." The verbal order was given in a loud, high-stress environment. It's a classic setup for a medication error. It was my responsibility to double-check the dose before administration, and I was delayed with another patient. "The fault is mine." Albright was taken aback by my calm defense. He was used to people crumbling, but what I said was true. The system had failed as much as the intern had. Furthermore, I continued, Dr. Chen is one of the brightest interns we have. He caught his own potential error. He hesitated. That's a sign of a good physician, not a bad one. To throw away his career over a near miss that was caused by systemic pressures would be a tragic waste. My standing up to Albright caused a major stir, but it worked. It bought Ben a reprieve. Instead of being fired, he was placed on probation, under my direct and constant supervision. I took the responsibility seriously. I didn't just watch over him. I mentored him. I spent hours with him after our shifts, drilling him on protocols, but more importantly, on the art of medicine. I taught him how to breathe, how to center himself in the middle of chaos. The machines are just tools, Ben, I told him. As we stood by a patient's bedside, look at the person. What is their face telling you? Are their hands clammy? Are they making eye contact? That's data too. The most important data. I made him practice talking to patients, not as a collection of symptoms, but as scared human beings. I ran mock code drills with him until his hands were steady. I defended him to other nurses and doctors, building a protective wall around him so he could have the space to rebuild his shattered confidence. Slowly, miraculously, he transformed. The anxiety began to recede, replaced by a quiet, steady competence. His brilliant mind, now unburdened by crippling fear, was free to work its magic. He began to thrive, earning the respect of the very staff who had once dismissed him. He developed a wonderful bedside manner, his natural empathy finally shining through. The day his internship ended, he came to find me. He was heading to a prestigious fellowship in immunology, a field he was passionate about. He held a small, awkwardly wrapped gift, a book on the history of nursing. Maria, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I don't know how to thank you. They were going to throw me away. You saw something in me that no one else did, not even myself. You didn't just save my career. I think you saved my life. I will never, ever forget what you did for me. He pulled out a card with his personal number on it. I'm probably going to be a very busy, important doctor one day, he said with a small, self-deprecating smile. But for you, I'm always just Ben. If you ever need anything, a medical opinion, a job, a kidney, you call me. I owe you a debt I can never repay. I just smiled and told him to make me proud. He did. Dr. Benjamin Chen went on to become a world-renowned specialist, a pioneer in his field. I followed his career from a distance, with a quiet sense of pride. The card with his number on it went into a drawer, a memento of a young man I had once helped. I never thought I would ever have a reason to use it. 20 years after I had walked out of my father's house, my own life was settled and calm. I was the head of nursing for a large metropolitan hospital, a position of great responsibility. My relationship with my family was one of polite, icy distance. We exchanged sterile Christmas cards. I received a generic, emailed invitation to David's wedding. We were strangers connected by blood, nothing more. Then came the phone call that shattered the fragile peace. It wasn't from my father. He would never have called me. It was David, his voice tight with a panic I had never heard before. Maria, you need to come to University Hospital. Now, it's Dad. My heart, which I thought had long ago calcified against any feeling for that man, gave a painful lurch. What happened? I asked, my voice all business, the nursing supervisor taking over. He just collapsed, David said, his voice breaking, in his office. They're doing tests. It's bad, Maria. It's really bad. I drove to the hospital on autopilot. I found my mother and brother in a private waiting room, a plush, sterile box reserved for VIPs. My mother was pale and shrunken, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. David was pacing, his tailored suit rumpled, his face etched with a fear and helplessness that was completely alien to him. The powerful Ray's men were, for the first time, powerless. The initial diagnosis was vague and terrifying. A rapid, aggressive neurological decline. A team of specialists was summoned. My father, Arthur Reyes, the titan who could bring corporations to their knees with a single phone call, was now a specimen under a microscope, frail and terrified in a hospital bed, tethered to a web of wires and tubes. His formidable voice was reduced to a weak whisper. The final verdict came a few days later, delivered by a grim-faced neurologist. It was a disease so rare it didn't even have a common name, just a string of letters and numbers, an autoimmune disorder, where the body's own defenses viciously attacked the nervous system, leading to paralysis, organ failure, and eventually, death. Standard treatments, the doctor explained, were ineffective. They could manage the symptoms, but they couldn't stop the progression. There must be something, David insisted, his voice laced with the arrogant assumption that a solution could always be bought or demanded. The neurologist sighed. There is one thing, he said hesitantly, an experimental treatment program. It's had some incredible results, but it's notoriously difficult to get into. It's run out of the Atherton Clinic by a specialist who is basically a legend in the field, a Dr. Benjamin Chen. My breath caught in my throat. Ben, it couldn't be. The world suddenly felt very small. The neurologist continued. He only takes a handful of patients a year. He's unswayed by money or influence. The waiting list is a decade long. To be honest, getting in is next to impossible. But impossible was not a word the Reyes family recognized. For the next week, I watched from a distance as David and my mother launched a full-scale assault. David called every politician in his contact list, from city council members to state senators. My mother called old family friends who sat on the boards of a dozen charities and corporations. They leveraged every ounce of the Reyes name, the name that had opened every door for them their entire lives. And for the first time, every door was slammed shut in their faces. The response was universally, politely, negative. Dr. Chen's process is sacrosanct. He doesn't make exceptions. His clinical trial is closed. Their frustration mounted, turning to disbelief and then to pure desperation. I would see David in the hospital corridors, his face gray with exhaustion, yelling into his phone at some hapless assistant. "What do you mean he won't take the call?" he'd shout. "Do you know who my father is?" I heard him complaining to my mother one afternoon, his voice raw with defeat. "This Dr. Chen is a ghost, a fortress. He acts like he's the King of England. Money doesn't work. Power doesn't work. I don't know what to do." I stood there, listening to them describe the man I knew as Ben, the scared, brilliant intern I had saved from ruin. The man whose private cell phone number was tucked away in a drawer in my apartment. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost suffocating. My father's life was in the hands of a man he would have dismissed as an insignificant cog in the medical machine, and the only person in the world who could reach him was the daughter he had branded a failure for choosing a life among those very cogs. The world had turned upside down, and I was standing at the fulcrum, holding the lever that could tip it in either direction. A few days later, the situation had become dire. My father's condition had worsened significantly. The doctors at University Hospital had done all they could. They were talking about palliative care, about making him comfortable. The unspoken words hung in the air. He was dying. I had gone to the hospital to drop off some paperwork for a patient of my own who was being treated on the same floor. As I walked past the VIP waiting lounge, I saw David. He was slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. He was on the phone with what sounded like Dr. Chen's administrative assistant. His voice, usually so commanding, was now pleading. "Please," he was saying, "just 5 minutes of his time. We'll donate to the clinic, a new wing, whatever he wants. Please, my father doesn't have much time." There was a pause, and then his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I understand. Yes, thank you." He hung up the phone and let out a long, ragged sigh. He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. "It's over, Maria," he said, his voice hollow. "They won't even put us on the waiting list. It's full. There's no hope." He looked utterly broken, the golden child stripped of all his power and privilege, reduced to a terrified son watching his father fade away. A part of me, a small, dark, vengeful part that had been silent for 20 years, wanted to savor the moment. to watch them squirm in the helplessness they had so often inflicted on me. But the nurse in me, the woman I had become, took over. I looked at my defeated brother, and I made a decision. "I can get him in," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. David looked up at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and irritation. "What are you talking about?" he scoffed, a flash of the old David returning. "How? I've got the governor's office making calls for me, and they can't get through." "What are you going to do? Fluff his pillows and offer him a back rub?" The insult, so reflexive and familiar, barely registered. I didn't say another word. I simply pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts to a number I hadn't dialed in almost 15 years, and pressed the call button. I put the phone on speaker. It rang twice, and then a warm, familiar voice answered. "This is Ben." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Ben," I said. "It's Maria Reyes." There was a moment of shocked silence, and then an explosion of warmth on the other end of the line. "Maria, my God. Is it really you? How are you? It's been forever." David's jaw dropped. He stared at the phone in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. The deference, the genuine joy in the voice of the unassailable Dr. Chen was something his mind couldn't process. "I'm good, Ben," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "It's great to hear your voice. Listen, I'm sorry to call you out of the blue like this, but I need a favor, a big one." "Anything," he said instantly, without a moment's hesitation. "Maria, for you, anything. You know that. What do you need?" David was now on his feet, his face ashen. He was staring at me, at his nurse sister, with an expression of dawning, horrified comprehension. "I need a spot in your program," I said, keeping my voice steady. "For my father, Arthur Reyes." "Done," Ben said immediately. "Consider it done. I have a spot I keep in reserve for discretionary cases. It's his. Get his records sent over to my office. We'll arrange for a transfer to Atherton tomorrow morning." It was that simple. A problem that $1 million and a governor's influence couldn't solve, I had just solved with a single phone call. Leveraging a currency my father had never understood, loyalty born of compassion. "Ben," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "I don't know what to say. Thank you." "Don't be ridiculous, Maria," he said, his voice soft. "I told you a long time ago. I owe you. I'm just happy I finally get a chance to repay a small piece of that debt. I'll see you tomorrow." He hung up. The silence in the room was absolute. David just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. The entire foundation of his world, the hierarchy of power and importance he had lived by his entire life, had been obliterated in a 2-minute phone call. "How?" he finally managed to choke out. "He was an intern at my first hospital," I said simply. "I helped him out when he was in trouble." The understatement of the century. I didn't need to give him the details. His mind was already reeling, trying to connect the dots. We went to our father's room together. My mother was sitting by his bedside, reading to him in a low murmur. He was awake, but barely. He looked so small in the oversized bed, the great Arthur Reyes diminished and frail. David, still in a state of shock, explained what had happened. He stumbled over the words, his voice full of a new, strange emotion. Awe. "Maria, she knows him," he said. "She called him. You have a place, Dad, at the Atherton Clinic. You're being transferred in the morning." My father's eyes, cloudy with illness and medication, slowly swiveled to me. For a long moment, he just looked at me, a flicker of the old, sharp intelligence returning. He was processing the impossible. His life, which he had so carefully built on a foundation of power, money, and influence, was now being saved by the daughter he had cast out, using a connection forged in the very profession he had scorned. The humiliation was a living thing in the room, a palpable presence. "You," he whispered, the single word a monumental effort. "You did this." "Yes," I said, my voice neutral. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing triumph or pity in my eyes, just the facts. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping from the corner, and tracing a path through the gaunt landscape of his face. "Why?" he asked, his voice a raw whisper. I looked at the man who had caused me a lifetime of pain, the man who had tried to break my spirit, and the answer came to me, simple and true. "Because despite everything, you are my father," I said. "And because my servants' careers taught me that you don't have to earn compassion. It's given freely, or it's not compassion at all." The silence stretched on, thick with the weight of 20 years of unspoken words. He needed me. To save his life, he had to ask for my help. The man who had only ever given orders now had to beg. I watched the war on his face, the pride fighting against the terror, the arrogance against the desperation. Finally, with a shuddering breath that seemed to tear through his entire body, the pride broke. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, stripped bare of all their old power. "Maria," he rasped, the name a strange and foreign sound on his lips. "I need your help. Please, help me." Those 2 words were his surrender. They were the confession of his failure, and my victory. A victory that tasted not of sweetness, but of a profound and weary sadness. My mother was openly weeping, her face buried in her hands. David was staring at the floor, his face a complex mask of shame and disbelief. I had not demanded an apology, but in that moment, I had received something far more potent, a complete and total capitulation. The tables had not just turned, they had been smashed to pieces, and we were all left standing in the wreckage, forced to build something new. I took a deep breath, the nurse in me taking command once more. "I'll make the arrangements," I said. The transfer to the Atherton Clinic the next day was a surreal experience. An ambulance, looking more like a luxury transport, arrived to take my father. At the clinic, we were not led to a waiting room, but were ushered directly into a large, sunlit office. And there, standing to greet us, was Dr. Benjamin Chen. He was older, of course, with a few distinguished gray hairs at his temples, and he wore the confidence and authority of a world-renowned physician like a perfectly tailored suit. But when his eyes landed on me, his face broke into the same warm, genuine smile I remembered. He completely ignored my mother and brother, and walked directly to me, enveloping me in a warm hug. "Maria," he said, his voice full of affection, "it is so good to see you. You look wonderful." He then turned to my family, who were standing frozen in a state of shock. He shook my father's hand gently. "Mr. Reyes," he said, his tone professional but with an underlying warmth, "I want you to know, you are in the best possible hands here. We're going to take very good care of you." He then looked directly at my father, and then at David and my mother, ensuring they all heard his next words clearly. "You should also know that the only reason you are here today is because of your daughter. Maria is a legend in the hospitals where she has worked. She is one of the finest, most compassionate, and fiercest nurses I have ever had the privilege to know. Over 15 years ago, she saved my career when everyone else was ready to throw me away. Your family owes her everything." My father, propped up in a wheelchair, simply stared at him, speechless. The validation, coming from this man who held his life in his hands, was more powerful than anything I could have ever said. It was a public anointing, a rewriting of the family narrative in real time. David looked like he had been struck by lightning. For the first time, he was seeing me not as his odd, defiant little sister, but as a person of immense power and respect in a world he knew nothing about. During the long, grueling weeks of my father's treatment, a slow, seismic shift occurred in our family. The old dynamics were shattered, and new, awkward ones began to form. My father, humbled and stripped of his physical power, started to watch me. He saw how I interacted with Dr. Chen and the other staff, with a quiet, collaborative authority. He listened as I translated the complex medical jargon into simple terms for him and my mother. He saw for the first time the skill, the intelligence, and the grace my profession required. One afternoon, as I was adjusting his pillows, he spoke, his voice still weak but clearer than it had been in weeks. "Was wrong, Maria," he said, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "About your career, about everything." It was the closest he could get to an apology. It was clumsy, incomplete, and self-serving. I was just, I had such high hopes for you. I wanted you to be powerful. I am powerful, Dad, I replied softly, meeting his gaze. You just measured power in the wrong currency. There was no anger in my voice, only a quiet finality. I wasn't seeking his approval anymore. I was simply stating a fact. He had nothing to say to that. He just nodded slowly and closed his eyes. David, too, began a fumbling attempt at reconciliation. He started calling me, not for updates he could get from the doctors, but for my opinion. What do you think of this new medication? Do you think he looks better today? He was asking for my expertise, acknowledging my value. One day, he came to my hospital during my shift. He said he just wanted to see where I worked. I watched him stand in the middle of the chaotic, humming ICU, his expensive suit looking utterly out of place. He watched as I calmed a delirious patient, directed a code team, and counseled a weeping family member, all within the span of 10 minutes. When I finally had a moment to speak with him, he just shook his head in disbelief. I had no idea, he whispered. I thought. I don't know what I thought. It's incredible, what you do. It was a start. My mother's transformation was quieter, expressed in small tentative gestures. She started bringing me coffee when I visited the clinic. She'd ask about my day, about my life, questions she hadn't asked in 20 years. Her gestures were freighted with the guilt of her long years of silence, and I accepted them for what they were, a fragile, belated attempt at mothering. The family was trying to recalibrate, to find a new equilibrium, but the sincerity of their change was debatable. Were they changing because they saw me in a new light, or simply because they were now dependent on my goodwill? I suspected it was a messy combination of both, a classic case of what my patients would call foxhole conversion. The real test of this new dynamic came a few weeks later. My father was responding well to the treatment, and with his returning health came a flicker of his old self. During a visit, he cleared his throat and assumed a tone that was unnervingly familiar. Maria, he said, this connection you have with Dr. Chen, it's a significant asset. Your nephew, David's son, is thinking about medical school. A summer internship here, under Chen's tutelage, would set him up for life. He was back to his old ways, seeing relationships as transactional, connections as commodities to be exploited. I felt a flash of the old anger, but it was quickly replaced by a calm resolve. I had spent years building these new walls, and they were strong. No, Dad, I said, my voice gentle but absolutely firm. That's not going to happen. He looked shocked. Why not? It would be so easy for you to ask, because my relationship with Ben is not an asset to be leveraged for family advantage. I explained patiently, as if to a child. It's a friendship, built on mutual respect. It's not for sale, and it's not a tool for nepotism. I will not abuse it. I then looked him in the eye and added, and for the record, I don't need anything from you. I don't need your money or your approval. I'm fine on my own. I have been for a long time. The message was clear. The old rules no longer applied. I was not a pawn in his games anymore. I was the one setting the boundaries. He stared at me, then looked away, a flush creeping up his neck. He had been rebuked, not by a defiant child, but by a powerful woman, and he knew he had no recourse. The test had come, and I had not wavered. My growth was real. A year passed. The storm was over, leaving behind a strange and quiet landscape. My father had recovered, not to the titan he once was, but to a quieter, more thoughtful version of himself. He had retired from the firm, handing the reins entirely to David. The disease had taken his physical strength, and the experience seemed to have taken his appetite for combat. Our relationship found a new, fragile footing. It wasn't warm or effusive. 20 years of damage could not be undone in a year. But it was built on a foundation of respect, a respect he had been forced to learn. He now spoke of my career, to his friends and to David, with a quiet, genuine pride that was both 20 years too late and somehow still welcome. We had a family dinner to mark the 1-year anniversary of his recovery. It was a stilted, awkward affair, all of us still learning the steps to this new dance. Near the end of the meal, my father, who had been mostly silent, raised his glass. He looked around the table, his eyes lingering on me for a moment. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever known it. "To Maria." David and my mother looked up, surprised. "For a long time," my father continued, his gaze unwavering, "I thought strength was about winning, about power, about bending the world to your will. Maria taught me what real strength is. It's compassion. It's integrity. It's showing up when you have every reason not to. She taught me the meaning of strength, and she saved my life." He raised his glass. "To Maria." It wasn't a perfect, tearful Hollywood apology. It wasn't a complete erasure of the past, but it was an acknowledgement. It was the truth, spoken aloud, in front of the family that had witnessed my long exile. And for now, it was enough. Later that week, I was back at my own hospital, doing my rounds. I was in the ICU, the place where my story with Ben Chen had begun. I was watching one of my newest charge nurses, a bright, passionate young woman named Sarah, as she expertly and compassionately guided a family through the terrible process of letting a loved one go. She was firm, kind, and incredibly skilled, a mirror of the kind of nurse I had always strived to be. After she was done, she came over to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but her posture proud. "That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do," she said. I put a hand on her shoulder. "You were incredible, Sarah," I told her. "You have a gift." She smiled, a look of deep gratitude on her face. "Thank you, Maria. That means everything, coming from you." In that moment, I felt a sense of clarity so profound it was almost dizzying. I looked around the humming, beeping unit, at the nurses moving with quiet purpose, at the small acts of kindness and immense skill unfolding all around me. This was my legacy. It wasn't in a name etched on a building or a fortune in a bank account. It was in the nurses I mentored, the patients I healed, the families I comforted. It was in the career I had chosen, the life I had built on my own terms. My father's approval, which I had craved for so long, felt like a distant echo. The victory wasn't in his surrender, it was in the realization that I had never needed his permission to be worthy. My worth was inherent, it had been there all along, in my own two hands. In the end, the greatest vindication wasn't watching my powerful father being forced to depend on me. It wasn't the shocked look on my brother's face, or the quiet respect I finally earned. The most profound victory was a quiet one, a realization that bloomed within my own heart. I didn't need to win a war with my family to find my value. I had already built my own kingdom, not of power and influence, but of compassion, skill, and integrity. The power was never about becoming the gatekeeper to my father's life, it was about realizing I had held the key to my own all along. My father's scorn had inadvertently forged me into the woman I am today, and for that, in a strange and complicated way, I am grateful. I want to thank you for listening to my story today. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it's an important one. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been profoundly underestimated, only to find your own path to success and self-worth? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all, and I believe our shared experiences are what make us stronger. If my story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming life's greatest challenges. Remember, your value is not determined by someone else's inability to see it. Sometimes, the people who believe in you the least end up giving you the most powerful motivation to believe in yourself. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I wish you all strength and peace.